Can I beat Demon Slayer the HINOKAMI Chronicles without breathing? As you can see, I am using text-to-speech since talking requires breathing.
Wait, you mean in the game? Would have been good to know. Well, let's jump into this. Can you beat Demon Slayer the HINOKAMI Chronicles without breathing? The rules are really simple. Just know using breathing technique attacks, which are really easy to point out since they literally show up on the side of the screen if used. Any visual effects don't count as long as it does not say that. Additionally, there will be a separate counter for cutscenes, and cutscenes only count if they are non-skippable. Also, spoilers for Demon Slayer up to the end of the Mugen Train arc. As I use a breathing technique accidentally on my very first attempt at this challenge, I have to restart the battle from the beginning. However, this also teaches me a valuable lesson. That being that the boost limit mechanic also forces you into using breathing technique attacks. Now, as you can see, I still kept this attack just to see what abilities were on the table and what were off. Since this was the first battle, I generally learned some really valuable things. Now on to the winning attempt. Since this is literally one of the first fights in the entire campaign of the game, it's pretty easy with heavily telegraphed attacks. And it also doesn't expect you to use breathing techniques that much. I've always found them to be more of a combo finisher, which will come into play a lot later in this video. But you can generally wail on the enemy with little regard for taking damage, and you'll be fine. That was, of course, until I saw this, the opening thread. So I, of course, used it, and it forced me into a freaking breathing technique combo. So those are off the table, which means I have to fight all of the enemies till the end of their fights. Which essentially means enemies have an additional 25% HP. However, in my winning attempt, I discovered an incredibly powerful technique. Grabbing. Okay, I know this doesn't sound that powerful, but Tanjiro's grab, for some reason, deals a ridiculous amount of HP, and on several different AI enemies in this game, you can infinite them! Like, you can just casually infinite enemies using Tanjiro's grab. So, it is an incredibly valuable technique, and one you will see me spam throughout most of this run. Once it came to the opening thread, I instead decided, what if I just keep mashing the X button and wail on the enemy? Yeah, that worked. With Demon number 1 down, we were on to Demon number 2. Yeah, this first chapter has a lot of unimportant fights, but they're all here, so I have to cover them. Your HP carries over. However, I'm pretty sure if you die, your HP resets, so I don't really know. This fight was really easy since I had learned what I can and can't do, aside from one thing, limit boosting, which I mentioned earlier, forces you to sometimes use those arts. However, I also decided to test ultimates. And as you'll soon see, basically anything that requires the L2 button, LT, whatever it is on the, like whatever it is on a PlayStation controller as well, kind of forces you into a position where you have to not use it, which is going to be a pretty big issue. But just like the first one, Demon number 2 goes down pretty easily as long as you can evade his attacks and continue to grab him. Now time for Demon number 3. This first level is very interesting, but it's the exact same as the last two. The demons have different attacks and progressively get harder, despite them getting easier in this challenge run because I actually learned of grabbing, which I know that sounds like a weird thing in a fighting and you're like, oh yeah, that exists, but seriously, it is broken. The big issue is Tanjiro's range sucks. You'll notice I talk about grabbing a lot in this video, but yeah, just like the other two demons before him, it's a really easy fight. That's incredibly unremarkable. Hey look, demon number 4. What do you think happens in this fight? If you guessed I grabbed him repeatedly and he died, well, you'd be right. But as you can see in this footage, that was the infinite. It can only be broken if they start glowing, but also, it's really exploitable. So, next fight! And it's demon number 5, another really uninteresting fight. Genuinely, this challenge run gets interesting. We just have to wait a few more chapters, I swear. Alright, now time for the hand demon. And boss, and also one with an actual health bar that appears on the top of the screen. And our first demon that does not directly ask for a opening thread. But it's a kind of annoying fight just because he's quite tanky and also cannot be grabbed. So the fight is basically running around and getting a few swings off while you wait for an opening. There isn't much else to it. Then you have Phase 2, the first phase of this run that provides an interesting challenge, which you'll see in a moment. But Phase 2, for the first, 90% of it, is the exact same, so I kind of already explained what we have to do. And as the fight was wrapping to a close and I was about to get to him, I was forced to use an opening thread. Yeah, bosses do not give you a choice! And these are essentially entirely QTEs. For clarification, I have tried failing every single one. It does not affect what happens in the cutscene and only affects your overall score on the mission. So, yeah, unskippable QTEs that are tied to ending a boss fight. Which involve total concentration, water breathing! So, this is where most of the breathing comes in, hence why there's a separate counter for cutscenes. There originally wasn't going to be, but these fights are the reason. And with the hand demon beaten, the first chapter has been completed. That did not rhyme. That sounded horrible. Anyway, generic demon fight number 5082! Guess how this one went? If you guessed I grabbed them till they died, you would be right! I know it may seem like I'm rushing through these, but do you really want to see me talk about every generic demon fight, which all go the exact same and require no additional things or things to be mentioned? Now that we've reached the Swamp Demon, we are actually at a fight with stuff to talk about! This first fight's a horde battle with Tanjiro and Nezuko, which adds the first additional rule that I've also decided to ban Blood Demon arts, because, well, it makes the game more interesting. Also, the game crashed. This happened a lot. It never happened in my 100% playthrough, so I don't know why this is happening now. In addition, letting Tanjiro or Nezuko strike has them using their breathing technique or Blood Demon art. So they are not allowed, which becomes an issue. However, it also means I get to try this whenever a new party member joins to see if they can actually fight with me, or I have to bench them. I don't think I noticed very quickly until a later attempt of him doing it, but I know for a fact I did restart this fight at some point. That restart was the attempt I played as Tanjiro and discovered he could infinite, which is the attempt you're watching. The second phase is a solo battle against one of the 4 or 3 and Nezuko, which is one that's a bit trickier despite you facing less enemies, just because Nezuko does not have an infinite. However, Nezuko is a character that is really strong and has one of the strongest grabs in the game, I find. So, it's not too big of a deal either way. She can deal really good damage, and the fight isn't that difficult. And frankly, if I didn't ban Blood Demon Arts, this fight would have been done exactly the same as it would have been done in a normal playthrough. Now time for the final fight of this chapter, Swamp Demon. Again. This one goes relatively similar to the first phase, with the key change of he can no longer be infinited, but there's also only one of him. So, it's honestly not that bad. But you might have noticed the little red bar in his health bar at around the 25% mark. Yeah, it's one of those. Either way, one quick time event later, and one breathing technique later, and we're on to the next chapter. And with the start of a new chapter, there's also the start of a new filler. I'll be honest, while skimming through a video to get clips, I don't even know if this is the same demon fight or not. Why are there so many of these? Anyway, the next fight is actually a boss battle. Because, yeah, there's a lot of boss battles in this game. Honestly, from this point on, it basically becomes a boss rush. Thankfully, I actually get stuff I get to talk about instead of, hey look, it's a generic demon we pummel to oblivion. However, this boss is still more of a generic demon we pummel to oblivion. Since relatively well-telegraphed attacks, a combination of being able to be grabbed. However, I am fairly certain this is the first boss to have a blowback, which is essentially an attack to prevent being comboed to oblivion. But you can still get grabbed. You can also still misinput an attack, but it's a pretty easy fight that goes down without a hitch. The next fight is relatively simple since it's just a 1v1 against the same boss, but with Nezuko instead. And again, I would like to introduce you to the grab button. God, it's so great. For clarification, it is not that broken in PvP since there is a button to escape combos. So, you cannot get infinited. But against AI who can't do that, I would like to introduce you to the grab button. This next fight introduces a mechanic that is a pain in the ass since it basically makes some attacks unavoidable. That being mid-battle QTEs. If you get hit by them, you have to press a button. Usually that button is Y. Y is also the use breathing technique button, which means you'll use a breathing technique and escape the QTE. So essentially, this boss, in this phase, introduces the mechanic of hope you don't get hit by an attack, because it is unavoidable and will deal double the damage it's supposed to, because you cannot press the Y button. It's a mechanic I really don't like, just because, one, it's QTEs in the middle of a battle, it isn't that fun, and two, for the sake of this challenge, did you have to choose the one button I can't use? Like, genuinely, couldn't you have chosen, like, X? Or something? But, I don't know, it's just really annoying. But the rest of the fight goes off without much problem, aside from the obligatory freaking opening thread, which uses a breathing technique. New chapter, new demon, new Inosuke. Yeah, Inosuke's here now. And, well, he sure exists. This is another enemy that is very easily grabbed to death because of how big of an opening it leaves to grab. You just wait for it to use any of its attacks, dodge that attack, and hit the grab button. Like, genuinely, it's not a difficult fight. The hard part was this fight crashed on me like 8 times. Again, the game didn't crash once during my 100% playthrough. But for some reason, this playthrough, this challenge run, the game crashes. Like, every couple of fights. I know I mentioned this a few times, but there was one fight I genuinely had to skip because I could not beat it before the game crashed. So, we'll get to that when we get to that. Anyway, time for the boss of the chapter. And, this boss sure is something. And I mean that when I say that, because, again, it is a boss with an unavoidable attack that requires a QTE, which is usually A or Y. Except for the fact it's usually both. So, an attack I literally cannot avoid, and if you do not avoid it, you cannot attack him. It is a very annoying fight because it just does not end, because you can barely attack him. You cannot grab him. He is our first, or I guess second boss to have that attribute. And, once again, you aren't always even on the same field as him. Then, of course, with the boss beaten and my controller's batteries replenished, it was time for our annual QTE to end a boss fight. Also, if you're wondering what I mean by batteries, I was playing this on computer. I have an Xbox controller. I don't understand why Microsoft refuses to just install internal batteries. Either way, next up is the Headless Demon, where we're joined by Inosuke, who is the best support character in the game for this challenge. Out of anyone that can join you as an additional party member for a battle, Inosuke is the only one whose attack does not use a blood demon art or a breathing technique. He is the only one. Seriously, Inosuke is the best pairing to get with really anyone, but basically just Tanjiro, because you play as Tanjiro through 90% of this game. So, I was really happy to see him since he is great, and genuinely, it's a relatively easy fight since it's a 2v1, which is really rare for this game, because every fight that's supposed to be a 2v1, I couldn't use the other person. But the Headless Demon goes down really easily. Now time for the Elder Brother Spider Demon, which I'm going to rant for a minute, because this is the worst fight in the entire game. 1, it is the only fight where you play as Nitsu, so you're playing with a character you are not familiar with. 2, poison. This is the only fight where poison is really a factor. 3, enemy is really quick and hard to hit, and hits like a truck, and is really fast, which I already said. For clarification, in my 100% playthrough, getting an S rank on this fight took me, I think, 2 hours. This was the hardest S rank in the game. To put in comparison, S ranks are really easy to get in this game. I have gotten most levels an S rank in this playthrough, just by sheer coincidence. But I hate this fight. Like, the fight's annoying and really difficult on a casual playthrough. This is a playthrough where I cannot use half my moveset. So, this was a fight I was dreading. This was a fight I really didn't want to do. This is a fight where I am not showing you most of the attempts. This is a fight that deserves to be burned in hell. So, easily hardest fight in the game. Like, this is the hardest fight in the game without a challenge run. The challenge run makes it worse. And to throw salt into the wound, this is the first non-chapter end fight to have an opening thread. So, there you go. Here's a use of a freaking breathing technique. I really do not like this fight. Spider Demon, Father. This is essentially just the Headless Demon fight, but with more HP and quicker attacks. So, really, it isn't that bad. Until Phase 2. Well, I say that more as a bait. Phase 2, honestly, isn't that bad. you just lose Tanjiro and have a more bulky and more hard-hitting boss. But again, his speed is his main weakness. Get your hits in when you can, and the fight goes down pretty easily. Next up, Tanjiro versus Rui. My favorite fight in all of Demon Slayer so far. And I really found this fight annoying. Rui is relatively quick and is more of a zoner than anything, which is really annoying when you don't have access to any of your medium-ranged attacks and your main thing is grappling. By the way, Rui can be grabbed. It's just really hard. But it's a fight that, while being difficult, is entirely doable. It just takes a lot of patience, which I don't really have. But once Rui's first and second phases are completed, we enter our obligatory cutscene and use another breathing technique. Now fighting with the power of the HINOKAMI Kagura, thanks to cutscene and story reasons that I skipped over, we have, honestly, one of the easiest fights in a while. Tanjiro's grab gets a massive boost in this state, since it goes from being a grab to more of a charge head first at the enemy, and if you hit them, you deal like double the amount of damage that your grab normally would. So, honestly, it's a really easy fight, which is a really nice refresher considering Phase 2 specifically, there's like 3 video files, so that's 3 separate sittings, because all the video files are one sitting essentially. Worth of it. And once that's done, well, what do you think? A cutscene with the use of breathing techniques? Actually, you're technically wrong. Since the finishing cutscene for this battle uses the HINOKAMI Kagura, which for the sake of the video I'm counting as one. Also, Nezuko uses her Blood Demon art. So this is uses 7 and 8. This Rui fight has currently like half of our uses. Good news, Chapter 6 is the easiest in the game by far. It doesn't have a single mission. It is solely cutscenes and a side quest, which is optional. Either way, Chapter 7 is also pretty easy, since it is 2 rhythm games, which I don't know if this should count, since it's use of total concentration breathing. So, I'm going to count it with an asterisk. The other of the 2 minigames is based on reflexes, so I don't think it needs to be counted. Anyway, let's move on to the final chapter. Next up, the Enmu fight, which, in my opinion, is the fight that got the hardest from this challenge. It comes down to, he's a very quick opponent that can be hard to hit, and has the distinct disadvantage of you can really only get one combo in every now and again. And remember like 20 minutes ago when I said that concentration attacks and breathing arts were generally your combo finishers? Yeah! This is the fight I was referring to. It's doable. I did use a continue, which was more so I have been sitting at this chair for 4 hours fighting this boss. It is clearly doable, because the boss has like a quarter of HP left, and I just don't want to do this anymore. In addition, this is another boss with QTEs. However, this one's a really good one, because the solution to these QTEs is burning a palm hand. Basically, play Mario Party 1. Remember that fight I said I literally couldn't beat because the game kept crashing? That's Enmu's second phase. which isn't even a difficult fight, because you have Inosuke. You can defeat him. The problem is, the fight is just long. I actually got to a point where after the final fight that is actually in the run, I was just like, you know what? I'll give it one more shot, see if I get lucky and the game doesn't crash. And guess what happened? I actually won! So I'm gonna let that play fast-forwarded. What was my reward for this, you may be asking? Simple! 2 breathing attacks. Inosuke uses one of his, and Tanjiro uses the Hinokami Kagura. Yay! Anyway, time for the Yakuza fight. And, well, it's pretty simple. It's not too different since, despite this being the first time we get to play as Rengoku, it's pretty easy and goes down really well. He has a really good grab and some pretty good standard attacks. So, I don't think it's too big of an issue. It's genuinely really good to have a fight after the hell that was the 2 Enmu fights that doesn't change too much. The second phase is relatively similar, just longer and harder. But I discovered the grab late last fight, so it basically becomes guard if you can't figure out how to dodge an attack, and grab him otherwise. Thankfully, a lot of his attacks leave a really good opening for a grab specifically, which means that it's a pretty easy fight once you have everything down. Which I really appreciate. With that, it's time to use another breathing art, because of the glorified QuickTime events, and finish the Mugen Train arc off with an explosion. And lastly, but certainly not least, the final fight against Rengoku. And it is one of the coolest fights in the game, albeit incredibly difficult. And I did end up using a continue, because while I could beat the fight without it, it would have taken additional hours, and this video was supposed to release about a month ago, so, and honestly probably will release an extra week late because of Persona news, but genuinely, I think it's pretty cool. It's a really fun fight that, while being difficult, especially since you have to go through multiple health bars in the entire fight without a heal, is a fun fight that lets you show off both of their movesets and their power at their fullest. Ending off the game with one last Hinokami Kagura, and 13 uses in cutscenes, and 1 in gameplay. So, that's the answer to, can I beat Demon Slayer, the Hinokami Chronicles, without breathing? Not really, but it depends on who you ask. If you enjoyed the video and made it this far, please consider liking and subscribing since it really helps out the channel a lot. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!